Jesus freak here. I've been racking my brain for a while on something I was working on my computer. Don't worry, no technical issues. It's just a personal project. I called it Project Crichton. After a sci-fi author who wrote a book about someone who tried to resurrect extinct animals and tried to resurrect some extinct creatures and filled in some of the holes from somewhere else. And there were some problems. You probably know what I'm talking about. So right now I'm mellowing down with some chamomile tea. I had dropped a hint yesterday, I think it was, that I had an idea regarding the text of the Bible. And wanted to put it to the test, but it was something where I was kind of out of my depth. For one, I don't speak Greek, and for another, doing the textual research necessary to prove it in its most complete form. It's a lot of work. It has to do with my rather negative take about Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, and my own textual hypothesis, which is practically the complete opposite of the one you find from most scholars. You'll find a lot of people, they say, we want to get back to an older form of the text. And they take this approach that over time additions crept into the text, so that the older text must necessarily be shorter and simpler. I, on the other hand, figured that in many cases the opposite was true. While I do believe that has happened in a few places, I believe that what happened more often is that someone's eye would slip from a word to another word nearby that ends the same. Something called homeoteluton. And if you've ever tried copying something by hand, you'll know that this happens a lot. Now, there's places overall overall, I think if you followed this tack, you'd come up with something very similar to the text that's underlying the KJV and the NKJV. But there's some places where you would come up with something a little bit different. It's hard for me to test this because I don't speak Greek. I can somewhat test it through the Latin transmission stream, which is an interesting beast in its own right. We do have a couple very good quality New Testament manuscripts in Latin. I believe they're called Fuldensis and Amiatinus, that are like very early copies of the Vulgate New Testament, and mostly, I believe Amiatinus is complete and Fuldensis is complete, except it has a gospel harmony instead of the gospels, or it's either that or the other way around. Either way, I have transcriptions, and I can compare these against the standard texts, the critical texts and the received texts in Latin. As well, I have several Latin translations of the Textus Receptus and a Latin translation of the critical text. So, to some extent, I can sort of see what's going on. Crack out a New King James because I don't want to overstate the difference in the language. I'm going to try to bring up a few examples of where my hypothesis might result in something different. Dwayne Green did a live stream recently where he talked about 1 John 3:1. I can't imagine that it's just because, as he's Canadian, he always says 1 John, but it's 1 John. Anyway, here's how it reads in the New King James. It says, "Behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know him." Now, cracking out a NASB 95, because this has a different text base, but a similar translation style. They're the same verse, 1 John 3:1. Usually the King James and New King James have longer readings. Okay, here we have it. "See how great a love the Father has bestowed on us, that we would be called children of God. And such we are. For this reason the world does not know us, because it did not know him." You catch it? The phrase, "and such we are." Now, the Latin tradition actually attests to this, but it actually got garbled in the Latin tradition. Here we are with a Challoner Bible, And I'm going to read how it reads here. Behold, what manner of charity the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called and should be the sons of God. Therefore the world knoweth not us, because it knew not him. You may notice a little quirk here of the translation, and this isn't necessarily a matter of a difference between the Greek and the Latin. This is just a stylistic quirk of the Challoner, that the Latin word caritas is much more consistently translated charity, in line with the Romanism of the translator. Caritas is the precise Latin equivalent of agape, so love would actually be a valid translation here. Now here it says that we should be called and should be the sons of God. And this is actually a different reading than either of the Greek readings. And I'll tell you what happened here. And this can be seen by comparing various Latin manuscripts. And in fact, I can't remember whether it was Ammianus or Fuldensis. One of them pointed this out. The standard Latin reading here for this bit is et simus, which means and that we should be. But there is a variant reading et sumus, which means and we are. And from what I understand, the Greek chiasmen is also and we are. And what this suggests to me, that this chiasmen exists in both the Greek and Latin traditions, but at some point fell out of the Greek tradition and got corrupted in the Latin tradition. We have evidence to it. Saying that this longer reading is clearly the older one and was at a certain point in time quite universal. The Vulgate being translated around the turn of the 5th century. And our evidence for it, I want to say we have a manuscript from about the 6th. I can't be 100% sure about that. Another particular quirk is that you'll find that the majority of Greek manuscripts don't have Acts 8:37, which is the verse about the Ethiopian eunuch's confession. And yet, we have external evidence from as early as the late 2nd century, around 180 or so. We have someone explicitly referring to the eunuch's confession, suggesting that the text he had of Acts in the late 2nd century had the verse. And I think that's fairly absolute in my opinion. And of course, people are going to go on about, 1 John 5:7, this heavenly witnesses, Comma Johannium. And I take the opposite tack because it's the oldest evidence that I am aware of is Vetus Latina evidence. And for centuries it shows up only in Latin. And when it starts showing up in Greek, it reads like it's been translated from Latin. Because there's some grammatical differences between the two languages. For example, Latin doesn't have a word for the, Greek does. So, you can say it may well have been an early reading, but it wasn't a Greek reading. You can't say this so much with the Old Testament because there's parts that are known to have been intentionally written in Syriac instead of Hebrew. So, what I wanted to do, and I really don't have the skill for it, is, what I want to do is establish sort of a non-skeptical Greek-based text based on how I understand the formation of Scripture. How I understand the New Testament text came together. And then at the same time have translations done in similar styles in various languages, allowing for parallel Bibles that don't make you go, huh. Like, one problem I've had with parallel Bibles is, well, with like diglots and stuff. I have a Spanish-English diglot over in the other room. The Spanish is Reina Valera 60. And the English is the King James. One of the biggest and most obvious issues with that is that the Reina Valera always translates the Tetragrammaton as the Spanish equivalent of Jehovah. That's the reason I don't use it, by the way. So I'd like to have it where, the languages are as close as possible, and it's not because they're all translated off the English, but because they're done with the same mindset. Jesus freak out.